Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. As always, joined by the great Phil Perry. Phil, Patriots are on their bye week, and I think it's time to get under the hood just a little bit with some of the decisions that we saw made in the early season and presaged what might happen because of them. Now, Bill Belichick, in putting Matt Patricia and Joe Judge in charge of the offense and taking the scrutiny that he did in the summer in training camp, said on September 9th to the Boston Globe, just a couple days before the season opened, I think they're both good coaches. Ultimately, it's my responsibility, like it always is. So if it doesn't go well, blame me. But as we see it unfolding, Phil, you got the lead actor, Mac Jones. You got his supporting cast, the offensive line and offensive weaponry around him. Those are the supporting actors. You got a director in Matt Patricia, co-director in Joe Judge. And then you have an executive producer over here. And it doesn't seem like we ever get to the executive producer with our day-to-day, week-to-week, play-to-play, drive-to-drive interrogations of what's wrong. It never really does get back to Bill in a week-to-week scenario, does it?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's just because it's implied. Isn't it implied?
I don't know, but we don't sit there. But I breered everybody there. I just want to with Bill. Yes, it is implied when we hammer the coaching staff or wonder what the play calls are, or wonder if they're just out there calling a succession of plays, whatever comes up with no real rhyme or reason, or we wonder why Mac Jones is squirrely or Isaiah Wynn can't perform. Yeah, we do. But in the end, those are the guys who take the shrapnel all week long. When the reason behind them being on the front lines, Patricia specifically, and then Jones taking the shrapnel from Patricia, being a foot soldier for the offense, it's just, it never really gets back to the four-star general sitting there addressing Congress. It's this way because we kind of knew it was going to be this way.
Maybe I'm hesitant because we're just coming off a few weeks ago talking about Bill Belichick nonstop and the decisions that he made with his quarterbacks, Bailey Zappi and Mac Jones, and you're playing one guy for a couple of series and you're pulling him after he throws a pick. And is that the best idea? And are you really trusting this guy the way you need to? And isn't he the guy for at least the next year or two?
Yeah,
or at least the next 7 weeks? Like,
it was 15 minutes ago we were hammering him. You're right.
Yeah, so I do think it does come back to him, but I think the reason I say it's implied is because every time we look at a Patricia play call, we say, well, Dan Orlovsky on Twitter, for instance, the other day says the spacing stinks and the play calling doesn't work. And, we look at that and we say, well, I wonder why. A guy who's never done it before, a guy who's a defensive coach, coaching things from the defensive perspective. Mac Jones tells us that all the time. He actually said about Bill Belichick the other day. Coach Belichick's doing a great job showing us things from a defensive perspective. You got these two great defensive minds coaching offense, and it hasn't gone well. We've got a sizable chunk of information here that would tell us it has not gone well. And I think the Mac Jones injury gives them somewhat of an excuse. He missed a month, and so it does give them a little bit of a break. And maybe you say, okay, well, maybe they're 4 weeks behind where they should be at this point, at the midway point. But Bill Belichick, when I asked him that last week, he said, hey, guys are in and out all the time. We still know a lot more about our team than we did before the season began. And so he kind of shrugged it off. So I say, okay, if he's shrugging it off, then I'll shrug it off too. They should be better by this point. And they're not. And it just was all, it was predictable, Tom. I mean, we talked about it all summer long, and maybe they have time to change it here the second half of the year, but I don't know how much optimism there is that they're going to all of a sudden become a top 10 offense the way they were last year.
Right. This was another quote, and this was a Dan Shaughnessy sit down that Belichick did with Shaughnessy, who was, it still has me a little dumbstruck as to how Dan became Bill's consigliere when he's just not really down there in the Globe. Generally has not been a friend of Bill, and he keeps track of that stuff. Maybe Dan just was smart enough to ask. Either way, Bill saying, I don't see it any differently than in the last 22 years in putting Matt Patricia and Joe Judge in the positions they were. Look at our other offensive coordinators. We had Charlie Weiss, then Josh. He'd never called offensive plays. Billy O'Brien never called plays in the NFL. Josh came back. We changed coaches in every area multiple times. Defensively, Matt Patricia had never called plays. Then he won a couple of Super Bowls. Brian Flores never called plays. That worked out all right. Steve's been calling defense pretty high up there statistically last year. We didn't play well, obviously, in the Buffalo game and a couple of other games, but I wouldn't say we had a bad year defensively, at least not statistically. We have plenty of coaches that didn't have previous experience, and it's worked out pretty well with most of them, but not all of them. That strikes me as propaganda and disingenuous in that all of those guys, whether it was Josh following a track, whether it was Billy O'Brien following a track, Matt Patricia following a track, all of those guys followed a track within the system to go someplace. So it struck me as disingenuous. Also, the collaboration that Bill covets is what he employed defensively with Steve, Gerard Mayo, and Bill himself. Steve, the play caller, but Gerard probably carries more defensive coordinator responsibilities than Steve does. Steve's the play caller. Gerard runs the meetings. The group of them put the offense together. I don't think that was an awesome precedent, what we saw down the stretch last year with Steve and Gerard. So it didn't work. Yet Bill was relying on this model for his offense. It's just, again, I'm talking in a circle here, Phil. Just throw me a lifeline, will you?
Well, the reason why it's disingenuous, though, you're right. You talk about the track. I mean, those guys that he mentioned, Patricia, Flores, Steve, they did have somewhat of a varied background. It wasn't like, Flores was just a defensive assistant and slowly climbed his way up the ladder. He was in scouting for a bit. He was special teams assistant for a while. Matt Patricia, we talked about it a lot this summer. Well, he might be able to coach offensive line because he coached offensive line with Dante Scarnecchia a long time ago. And so he does have some experience there. But all of those guys spent the better part of a decade working on the side of the ball that they eventually became chief on. And so Matt Patricia, 6 or 7 years, defensive side of the ball. Now he's calling plays. Brian Flores, same way. Steve Belichick, same way. Bill Belichick might look at it and say, well, 3 years as a head coach, that's the equivalent of 10 years on any side of the ball because there's so much you have to do and there's so much you have to understand. And so there's no reason why you can't go from that job to ostensibly offensive coordinator. But when it looks the way it looks, Tom, it allows us to go back and say, well, was that the right thought process? And so that's what I think everybody, watching Andrew Whitworth, who's now in the NFL, longtime tackle for the Rams. He's looking at that Orlovsky tweet that I just mentioned. And he says something along the lines of, it was crazy for them to think that this would work, given the setup that they have. He doesn't mention those guys by name, but I can tell you, going back to the combine last year where we had that conversation where I was probably pretty groggy, probably a little bit tired, probably been out a little bit late in Indy.
Sure, you were doing your work. You were reporting from the, you have to stay up late to get people to talk to.
It's part of the scene there. But people were, I use the word flabbergasted. People were just stunned. And they would qualify it, Tom, often with, but it's Bill Belichick. And Bill knows more than I do. And they'd shrug their shoulders. And that was sort of the period on their commentary. But that was preceded by a lot of, borderline laughter at the situation.
And these aren't just people who have no concept of what the Patriots are all about.
No,
these are people within the league who have been involved or know about the Patriots or have observed the Patriots closely.
People who have intimate knowledge of how the Patriots function. People who, even if they don't, are coordinator level coaches themselves, and or high level front office people themselves. One told me before the season started, guys train their entire lives to be offensive coordinators and to be in that position that when they have the opportunity to call plays, they're ready for it. That's not what they've done here. And so again, I think it's just worth revisiting.
I agree.
Because now we have more information. And if it had blown up in our faces, Tom, we could look back and we could play that flabbergasted quote and we could say, man, were those people wrong? And man, did we sound dumb, telling you what we've heard from people around the league, because clearly they don't know what they're talking about, because look how dumb the rest of the league is. And
Bill got him again.
Bill got him again. The Patriots are the geniuses again.
And that's the interesting thing. I asked Matt Patricia after the Green Bay game game, perhaps? I don't know. Might have been a little later. Might have been the Detroit game. Do you feel validated? Because he did at that point deserve an opportunity to say, look, I'm not a complete muttonhead. I did surprise you guys. I did know which end of the play sheet to hold on the bottom and the top. So I did do a good job with that. And he does deserve kudos for that aspect. But having gone against more difficult defenses in the Jets and the Colts, having had so many critical offensive line breakdowns, whether it be the opener against Miami that leveraged that entire game, the offensive line, or the last two games in which or the Bears game for that matter, he's in charge of the offensive line too. And again, it's not Matt Patricia's fault. You know, I've often heard Matt Chatham talk about the character assassination of Matt Patricia that has ensued by him being put in a position that we didn't anticipate, and that it's personal. I think that most people have been willing to acknowledge, at least I have, I know you have, that he's in a crap spot and he didn't ask to be put there. And he is smart. As socially awkward as he has been and difficult in the past, I don't blame the guy in the least for looking a little clueless when the offensive line can't perform. But again, as you pointed out, it's a guy who's been put into a position no matter how much. It's like the CEO going down and being the cashier. Okay, I'm sure he knows how to do it, but there's still a learning friggin' curve. He's not going to be moving the line real quick, no matter how much he's pulling down, for God's sake. And you look at it like with last year, too, the precedent of the defensive coaching staff being a collaboration. And this one, it's what's ironic about the whole thing is, as we are simultaneously charting Bill Belichick's course to 348 and crediting him for the brilliance that he's displayed on the sidelines, and as an executive and as a developer of a franchise and a dynasty and all the things that he's been about, which can never be taken away, we do also have to scrutinize the immediacy of the decisions that have been made since 2019 in the direction of the franchise as it has sunk to a level of mediocrity, and the head-scratching decisions that seem to leave them resigned to being mediocre because they have to dig out from the decisions made. I do want to just use this. You found this initially. This was Mike Lombardi on ideas, and Bill thought the collaboration was great. And Mike Lombardi kind of cut to the chase on that without specifically saying it. He said, at the end of the summer, I think you see a little lack of focus offensively because they're kind of all over the place, right? I think that Bill is very much like Steve Jobs in the sense of how he thinks about things. Steve Jobs says, I know this is Mike talking and it's a direct quote apparently. Steve Jobs says, people think focus means saying yes to things you focus on. But that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that are there. You have to pick carefully. I'm actually as proud of the things we haven't done as the things I have done. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. That's me repeating Steve Jobs' quote, that Mike Lombardi used. And then Lombardi continues. He says, I think that this is the challenge that awaits Bill as he watches his offense this summer. How does he say no to all these ideas that these new coaches have come into and remain focused on the task at hand? I think that's the real challenge, right? I think that's what they have to do. Phil, your ball.
I wonder if that's now what they have to do during the bye week. I wonder if, that's phenomenal right now. Please, people, check it out on the YouTube. That was amazing. He's got the 2008 Masters hat. That thing flew off, and now I think apropos, given where we work, you've got a peacock on top of your head, bro. I would say that maybe this is where they are now, Tom. Is it possible? You know, and Lombardi's talking about training camp and narrowing things down in training camp. Is it possible because Bill Belichick looks at the start of the season the way that he does and says, well, we're really not going to know a whole lot about this group until October. That's what he told us right before the season began. And then you lose your starting quarterback for a month. But now he has been in for, I think it's 5 games now, right? 5+, including the Bears game. Does Bill Belichick finally have enough information at his fingertips to say, okay, time to narrow down those 1,000 ideas, because that's what it feels like they are right now. They've got the wide zone ideas going. We still see those occasionally. They've got the power run game ideas going. They have the RPO the last couple of weeks, ideas that have now been sprinkled in. Do those work? Do they not? How efficient are those truly? They have the downfield passing game ideas, which they've clearly tried to hit on 1,000 times over the first half of the season here, that have resulted in various rates of success, I think is putting it kindly. So what are they? What are they? And Bill Belichick has to be looking at it and saying, guys, can we settle on a couple things here? Because there's not a single thing that we do that we can look to week and say, we can depend on that group of core plays. They don't have that right now. And to me, that should be part of the discovery process during the bye.
And probably some of our wonderful listeners are right now saying, what about Ramondre Stevenson? You guys love Ramondre Stevenson. And you're right. But you can't rely on him because you can't rely on the blocking up front. And if you look statistically, Phil's much better at this than me because I gloss over with this next-gen stats. But yards after contact, if Ramondre Stevenson is in the top 5, I'd be absolutely gobsmacked. Gobsmacked, folks. Because he makes yards on his own. He makes yards that aren't there. He makes yards when he is hit in the backfield. He makes yards that have to come as a result of offensive line lapses. And I look at these offensive line lapses, and as they go to the bye, in my opinion, this offense is not truly fixable for 2022. The offensive line is not going to heal sufficiently between the concussions for Marcus Cannon and David Andrews, and as they come back, and between the level of play you've gotten from key guys on the offensive line. Isaiah Wynn for the majority of the season and Cole Strange lately. So you don't have the individuals who are playing well enough. They're not healthy enough. And you don't have the staff or the supervision for that group because Matt Patricia is spread thin to extract from them a level of play that's going to make the offense anything but an anchor on a team that has a really good defense and some promise to it.
Just to let you know, you were right. Ramondre Stevenson is 5th in the NFL in yards after contact
just
per attempt. Really good job by you. Who needs the advanced analytics? But, Tom, to your point, they're still 24th in the league in yards per carry. So, he's a great player. Do they have the ability to help him out where he can actually change games? Because as good as he's been these last couple weeks, it hasn't been good enough to make the rest of the offense look very good.
Think about that, 24th. And that's not like there's a shit ton of kneel downs in there either at the end of games. 24th. And we Albert, and we thought that this was going to be a tremendous offensive line and running back group.
That's what we thought. And to me, it does start with the offensive line. And that's why I think it's hard to envision how they fix this thing, right? You get an immediate upgrade whenever David Andrews gets back from his concussion. And that's great. And that may help Cole Strange quite a bit at left guard because he has struggled hard these last couple of weeks. And I don't know if he's dealing with something physically or if other teams have just gotten a read on him and how they can beat him. But listen, it's the NFL. Every week you're going to see some pretty powerful guys on the interior. The Bills have one of the best defensive lines in the league, especially when it comes to the pass. I think they lead the league in pressure rate this year. And they don't blitz because they just got a bunch of talented guys up front. The Dolphins just added Bradley Chubb. So, yes, you saw 2 good fronts these last 2 weeks. But are there reasons to be concerned long-term about what you have on your offensive line, whether it's Cole Strange or whether it's Isaiah Wynn, who doesn't look like, honestly, a very good backup at either spot that he's backing up right now, tackle or guard? And how long can you survive with 2 or 3 spots along your offensive line that are real concerns? And what can you do? If Bill Belichick is looking at it and he's doing his assessment of the offense and he's saying, okay, these are the buckets that we're going to live with the rest of the year in terms of our offensive play calling, what does he go to? I mean, what can you call? What can you run when your offensive line is leaky as it has been? I don't know. Maybe you call the RPO stuff because those guys are just run blocking anyway. You're not even asking them to pass protect, and it's a way to mix in some nice, quick, easy, short yardage, sure, but some easy yardage from your pass game. So maybe that's something they continue to lean on a little bit. But, is it how many screens can you run a game, Tom? I don't I don't know what you do, and that to me has to be the concern.
It's funny how many screens, because at this juncture, the screens are horrendous. Even the like little wheel pass screens that we see are.
They did get Jonnu Smith for that long one, right? That the little tight end screen.
But there was the one to Ramondre Stevenson that they didn't get a cut block on the right defensive end, and he's just standing there, and Mac had to throw a balloon out. And some corner's going to smell it out too. In between the defensive end, sniffing out and creating problems for the arc of the pass, there's going to be a corner who just comes and just grabs that balloon and runs.
It's just
concourse with it.
What's interesting is that the offense could end up running into the same kinds of issues it ran into last year, Tom, where we looked at them last year and we said they can't throw down the field. So defenses are just attacking the line of scrimmage, and you may be able to run the ball pretty well, but if we can throw 10 bodies in the box, you're going to have a hard time running it. And we're going to dare you to beat us over the top because we don't think you can do it. You don't have the weapons to do it. Your quarterback is relatively unproven as far as that stuff goes.
And you don't have the time.
This year, they're better at throwing it down the field.
They
don't have time to get it down the field. And so, the defenses are probably going to start doing the same thing. Hey, let's sniff out these screens. Let's sniff out these RPOs. Because if they can't do that, they really got nothing in the pass game because we trust our 3-4 guys up front to beat 2 or 3 of their guys on a very consistent basis. Be in Mac Jones's face, he's going to start scrambling around and their offense is toast. So again, it's a huge challenge. It's advanced calculus that Bill Belichick is going to have to solve. Good thing he's got a rocket scientist on his staff.
Yeah. And the patient has a variety of illnesses right now. So it's hard to cure one and then find out if that was the root cause. But speaking of root causes, I wrote this last week toward the end of the week, and I have written multiple Mac Jones defense pieces, but this was a portion of what I wrote. Till the Patriots figure out what they want to be in terms of scheme, until they can get passable performance from the offensive line in terms of protection, until they believe Jones is fully back from the ankle and his time missed, until they get commensurate production from the $50 million in cap space they're spending on Hunter Henry, Nelson Aguilar, Jonnu Smith, and Kendrick Bourne, and Devontae Parker, and until they stop committing mind-numbing penalties, until they get there, you can't really pass judgment on Mac Jones. You can't even pass judgment on those skill position players who are making big money until all those other things are sorted. So I'm at a point, Phil, where I actually could just go to the little acronym. Is it an acronym with 3 letters? Yeah. NMF. Not Mac's fault. And I apply it to everything. And I think it drives fans at this juncture crazy if I'm judging social media or talk radio callers. There's always a danger in that. NMF. Not Mac's fault. And it's knee-jerk. But I really don't think it is. And I'll go through one more thing. This was a fun exercise. I went through all the game books going back to the Detroit game. Mac has had 40 possessions since the Ravens game. 40 possessions for Mac. So he had the Ravens, he got hurt. He had 3 against the Bears, and then he had the Colts and the Jets. On the 40 possessions, you have 15 punts, 11 field goals. So we're at 26. 5 touchdowns. We're now at 31. 7 turnovers. 38, and 2 they gave it over on downs. Okay. 9 of those punts came after 3 and outs. So 21 punts, 15 punts and 16 scoring drives. Touchdown scoring drives, 32, 75, 75, 62, and 2. They have had 17 drives, Phil, of 5 plays or fewer that ended with either a punt or a turnover. So it's basically, hey, guys, we're out here to run some offense. Hey, guys, we're coming back. You're out there again. And 21 drives of 5 plays or fewer that ended with a field goal, punt, or turnover. And the reason I included that, the field goal, was because they've had a lot of short field goals that they've settled for on, 4 down, 0 yards, kick the field goal from 27.
So it's over. So you looked at a span that went 40 drives, right?
Yep, starting with the Ravens game.
And you just listed 21 of those, so more than half. Explain that one again.
Yeah, 21 drives, 5 plays or fewer, that ended with a field goal, a punt, or a turnover. And understand the field goal, if it's coming as a result of you taking over an outstanding field position. You don't have a 5-play drive that ends with a field goal. That doesn't happen.
Right. That's remarkable that over half your drives look that way. it's a massive, massive sample size. And I agree with you. Is that Mac's fault? And it's not to say, and I know you're not saying this, it's not to say that you couldn't find some individual plays where you look at Mac Jones and say, was that the right decision?
No doubt.
Like one from last week. And we just got off the phone with our buddy Castle, and he was just watching the game, and he had listed this play near the top in terms of his takeaways. But there was an early sack in this game. We talked about it on the breakdown with Ted Johnson as well. There's an early sack where it's 3rd and long, and the Patriots have some long developing routes called for their 3 receivers. They max protect, so Hunter Henry stays into block. Ramondre Stevenson initially stays into block. And nothing's open because the Colts get so much depth that they are totally willing to leave really 10 yards open underneath. But they get a bunch of defensive backs back, and so all those deep routes are taken away. Well, as soon as Mac Jones sees that, it's only about 2 seconds in the pocket, and he doesn't really have to bail. If you slow it down and you watch, he really doesn't have to, but he does anyway. And he ends up running to his left. He misses Hunter Henry on a little check down after Henry is done executing his chip, and he leaks out into the flat. If he had just stayed in the pocket and found Hunter Henry, he might have had a shot at actually picking up that first down. There was so much space between Hunter Henry and the next defender because they were so focused on getting back. But the reason I would even look at a play like that, where you look at the quarterback and say, bailed too early, took a sack when you didn't really need to, didn't necessarily give your offense the best chance. The reason, big picture, I come back to that and say, are we still blaming Mac Jones for that? It's because, number one, he's uncomfortable because of the protection he's gotten since he's started the season, really, even going back to training camp. But number two, you can't protect. And so you keep Hunter Henry into block. He gets out into the flat, but he gets out a little bit late because he had to stay in and help Yodny Kajust, who is now your 3rd right tackle of the season, because you're having issues coaching, executing on the offensive line, maybe even evaluating personnel on the offensive line, knowing what you have there. And so, again, is that Mac Jones's fault? I think big picture, you zoom out and you say, no, not really.
Yeah, because he's seen that movie before. Okay, we got everybody's down the field. It's breaking down. I better start moving out. I mean, it's you become conditioned. No matter what you're – I'm in my driveway the other day, and the kids had some of their friends over, and someone parked behind me. I look at the car behind me. I say, oh, don't want to back into that thing. It's right behind me. Wish it wasn't. Well, I get in the car, and between the time that I looked at the car, evaluated that I didn't want to back into it, and sat down, I forgot that the car was there. So when I started backing up and I heard my backup, hey, you're about to hit something, doot, 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 I was on to thinking about my coffee or whatever. And I was just dismissing the noise that I was hearing as, oh, I've heard this noise before. There's nothing to be alarmed about. There's no reason for me to pay any attention to that. Nothing's going to be different. And I banged into the car. Because out of repetition, every frickin' day I can get in my car, put it in reverse, and back up to that spot and drive away. And out of repetition, Mac Jones sees these plays developing or not developing and says, oh, I've seen this movie before. And as he's sliding down or jogging out of bounds or whipping it off the kicking net, he's like, ooh, there was something there. Same thing with me and Tess's Civic. I didn't expect it to be there.
Okay.
And I had to put my head on the steering wheel for 2 seconds and say, oh, and then go up to pregame live.
My question is, can you reverse that conditioning?
Yeah, you have to put a note on the steering wheel that says, you're old, look behind you.
So does Mac Jones, maybe he writes that on his play sheet. He writes himself a little note and says, there are going to be times where there's not going to be someone on your back within 2.1 seconds.
Yeah.
I honestly think it's going to take I think it's going to take some time, Tom. Doesn't he have to see like weeks and weeks of good protection before he starts playing like he understands he'll have good protection? I mean, this has been since the summer. This has been an issue. The offensive line's been an issue all year long.
He's gotten months of shit protection. Shit protection. I'll say it again for the hell of it. The reason Mac Jones put Cam Newton's job in peril immediately was because of his ability to stand with his feet flat, process, and deliver with accuracy and poise in the first days of training camp. That guy is gone. I don't know when he's coming back, but he's so squirrely and so apprehensive and so unsure and untrusting of the play call, of the protection, of really anything, that it is going to take weeks at the very least to dig out, Phil.
Do you think there's any chance they have a offensive line assessment problem? Because you look at the decisions, Tom, again, this is getting a little big picture now, but this is what we're talking about. This is what their issue has been. You part ways with both Shaq Mason and Ted Karras this offseason when you could have figured out a way to keep both. You could have. You draft someone in the first round that you think is going to be a great player, and they have to assume that he's going to be not just a good player, but a great player, because you don't spend a first round pick on a guard unless you feel that way. That has to be part of the equation for them. And even though it hasn't worked out consistently this year, it's worked out well enough at times that, we're not going to write off Cole Strange by any means. But is there because since Dante Scarnecchia has been gone, he was not just the offensive line coach. He was, to me, and Bill Belichick might say, no, you're crazy, but he had so much influence over the guys that they drafted. I mean, they really leaned on him for information on these guys, that he had become, I think, in some ways, like their chief offensive line evaluator too.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're looking at what looked like some questionable personnel calls at a very important position group, and it almost goes beyond the coaching. So I just wonder if they have a problem just understanding what they need there or what works there.
I also think that the absence of Dante Scarnecchia has also had a psychological impact, or removed a psychological advantage that the team had. You had this gruff but lovable, smart but profane coach who'd been there and done everything. And I don't think anybody on that offense ever wanted to let Dante Scarnecchia down, ever. And then to hear Mac Jones kind of obliquely cite mental and physical toughness on the offensive line during his WEEI interview. And he starts with himself too, includes himself, but it was also jarring to hear Mac cite toughness. I don't really ever think I ever heard that broached with the offensive line when Dante Scarnecchia was here. So the upshot to the point you're making is, look, Bill's tough and Bill's old and Bill's gruff and Bill can be amusing, but it's different when it's an assistant who's kind of under Bill too. So he's in the same boat as you as an employee of Bill. Nobody wanted to let Dante Scarnecchia down. And I just don't think that that's present in the same fashion now. That pressure, that weird overarching pressure. Is that odd?
Yeah, I think it may have been replaced just by, I think you're right that he brought a different element to the staff. But I assume now guys look at it and say they don't want to let Mac Jones down, given the way they really enjoy him. And the way they really respect him. I think guys probably look at somebody like David Andrews and feel the same way when he's in there. Man, I can't let that guy down. He puts too much into it. He cares too much. And I don't think that's David
can't yell at you, and Matt can't yell at you at the same way that and extract from you as a coach. Like you've had a coach or a teacher or anybody or a parent. You can't let him down. It's different, I think. I don't know.
I think the one guy you could look at and say that factor that you're talking about could be a factor is Isaiah Wynn.
Yep.
That feels like somebody who could use someone somewhere on the staff to tap into something that's not being tapped into at the moment. Because I don't think
he probably already resents Bill. So he's not maybe to get inside the brain of Isaiah Wynn.
He may. Based on the position move and his financial situation. Bill also gave him $10 million, so he should be giving the guy a bear hug probably every time he sees him. But he's a player that's not this bad, and he's been unusable. He's leading the league in penalties, I believe. He comes in to replace Cole Strange, and he's not much better, if at all. I think he actually got benched himself late in the game because he had such a bad series at the end of that game, and Strange had to come back in. So, again, how do you fix it? I don't have an answer right now. That's a tough spot to be at week 10 of the season.
Well, let's put a cork in it. We'll bring Castle in on Thursday. We will circle up on that, but more likely we will be doing our awards. Okay, we're going to be doing bi-week awards and a state of the. Well, we kind of just did that. Well, whatever. We'll see you Thursday.